You're listening to a Corridor Business Journal podcast.
It's time for straight talk about diversity, frank questions, honest answers, and real insights. It's Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union, with your hosts Sarika Bhakta of Nikea Diversity Consulting and Anthony Arrington of Top Rank Professional and Executive Search Firm. Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union, is a Corridor Business Journal podcast. On today's episode, Jennifer Bennett, president of Shive-Hattery, architecture, engineering, and design firm.
Many of us had a parent who we were able to see and see ourselves in that role. I can do that job. But how about if somebody's growing up in a family and in a community where they don't have that modeled at all? You know, there's no architect or engineer they're connected to. So how do we get over that hurdle?
We'll be right back.
Green State Credit Union is proud to sponsor Diversity Straight Up. Established in 1938, Green State is Iowa's largest financial cooperative, serving nearly 250,000 members of all walks of life. Green State's products include checking accounts, loans, investments, insurance, commercial services, mortgages, and credit cards. Profits are returned to members in the form of better rates on deposits and loans. We encourage you to learn more at greenstate.org. Green State is federally insured by the NCUA and is an equal housing opportunity lender.
Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union, is also sponsored by Alliant Energy.
Hello and Happy New Year. Welcome to another episode of the Corridor Business Journal's Diversity Straight Up podcast. I'm Sarika Bhakta.
And I'm Anthony Arrington. We're looking forward to hanging out with you for a little while. We appreciate you tuning in. Going to have a great show today. We're going to have some real conversation and some real talk.
Always keeping it real.
That's right.
I have something on my mind, Anthony.
There's something on my mind.
What do you got on your mind, Sarika? What's on your mind?
I can't be serious when you ask me like that.
That's okay. What's on your mind?
Well, today is Inauguration Day. I was born in Gujarat, India, one of the largest democracy, India. Came to being raised in the second largest democracy, America. However, never in my wildest dreams would I ever imagine having a woman leader, a VP. Woman, someone who's Indian or half Indian like me, and an individual who is making waves.
Yeah.
I grew up in America in places that there was no other Indians. And so being able to see someone in a leadership position, I've always thought that representation, if you can connect with someone, they can still help you go a long ways. But it really hit me that representation does matter.
Yeah, it does. And you're right. I'm excited about that. I woke up today kind of feeling the same way. You know me, I get pretty animated sometimes around political issues, but
No, you don't.
Never, never. But you know, it's as a black man growing up in America, obviously seeing Obama was a beautiful thing. But given the environment in our country and globally, to see what happened in 2020 and to watch those individuals win and to watch Kamala win. And it's funny, I went and dug out my yellow shirt, my campaign shirt, because I wasn't sure who I was picking. And when she came to Cedar Rapids the first time, it was when I decided I'm rolling with her. So when she didn't get the nomination and then got picked, I was like, yeah, I'm busting out my yellow shirt again. Kamala for the people. But it's good. It's a refreshing feeling given what we've been challenged with.
So it's really interesting. I think you and I may have talked about this before, that sometimes when individuals identify President Obama, they identify him as the first black president.
Mm-hmm.
He's biracial as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always first black president.
Yep.
And here with our VP, Kamala Harris,
Right.
they're saying half black and half Asian or
Right.
half, I mean, you know me, I'm
Yep.
really about the nationality. So
Yeah.
Asian is a big hodgepodge. So
Right.
however you want to connect and resonate. But it's really interesting. President Obama, first black.
Right.
And when it came to the VP here, half and half.
Right.
And so that's really interesting.
It is. It's around history. It's around American history and Caucasian history, and the notion that if you have a drop of blood in you, that's from anybody black. You're black. It's been that way for eons in this country, and it's set a tone in the country and a lexicon and a converse, and it's always been that way between black and white, right? If you're mixed, my kids, I'm married to a white woman. My kids are biracial. They identify as black.
So is it with the black and white, but not with black and Indian or black
Right,
and anything else? So it's just
right.
really black and white?
Right, historically, right?
Okay.
Now, I'm not the expert, but I'm saying historically that's how it's been. And that's why you will always hear when you've got biracial children, typically they're identified as black. So
Whether or not they identify, that's
whether or not they identify,
that's a key
right.
question,
Yeah,
though, how they
exactly.
identify.
Yeah.
Well, we can go on a lot about
Yeah.
these topics. That's what's on our mind.
Yeah.
But we have a great guest here today that we'd love to be able to hear what's on our
Yeah.
guest's mind.
Yeah, let's talk to her. Let's bring her in.
What's on our guest's mind?
Just a little bit about Jen here. As president of Shive-Hattery, it's a leading architecture, engineering, and interior design firm. Jen is responsible for the overall leadership, strategic planning, culture, vision, and direction of current and future operations. Jen joined the design firm in 2003 and has 25 years of experience of client service, talent development, and market growth. She has a structural engineering background and previously served as the vice president and office director of Shive-Hattery's Quad Cities location. Yay, that's my old stomping ground, Quad Cities. Now we've got her here in this
Yeah.
region. But welcome, Jen. We're so excited to be able to have you here. We obviously have learned a little bit about your professional background, which we're going to go into a little bit more. But can you tell and share with our listeners a little bit more about your personal background?
Sure. So I'm an Iowa native. I was raised in the Quad Cities, and as many women engineers are, I had a dad who was an engineer. If you ask women in my generation what brought them into engineering,
Oh, interesting.
often they've got a parent with who is an engineer.
That's interesting.
Anyway, mom was a teacher, grew up in Bettendorf, and went to University of Illinois to pursue engineering school. Had
There you go. You finally got an Illinois. You finally
you
got an
in Illinois?
Illinois.
Shambana, U of A.
Are you a U of I grad?
I am.
Oh,
Are you?
I didn't know that. I am.
Oh, this is something in hot country, Jen. We'll have to
I
talk
know,
about.
I know.
She doesn't hear that much. You see the hair perked up there, right?
I just say, when someone asks me, I just say U of I. Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, they can just go down the row.
That's right. It's all U of I.
So graduated from Illinois.
Yeah, came back to the Quad Cities to work, and then I found my way to Shive-Hattery in 2003. And in 2003, I had 3 boys, all under the age of 4, and it was, those were some crazy busy years.
So 2003, that's when you started. Did you start full-time, part-time?
So I came to Shive-Hattery because there was an opportunity there for me to work part-time and still have a very meaningful career. It was a meaningful position with responsibility, and just saw a path where I could manage the busyness of my life in the short term, and still progress my career. It was a rare thing. 20 years ago.
Yes, and that's why I asked, because I know you said back in 2003 you had 4 children.
Three
boys.
Three
under
rambunctious boys.
I just added 1 for you, didn't I? Went from 3 to
Add
4. You had 3 children that were under the age of 4. Hence, it prompted me asking, was it part-time, full-time? Because you said it
Yes.
was a lot. So let's talk a little bit about this. We know that, and when we talk about diversity and talent, we always say the part-time, full-time, that is diversity in your composition. However, in reality, a lot of times, and we see this across all industry sectors, right, Anthony, that many times part-time talent is not looked upon as favorably, nor are they at times given some meaningful opportunities, as you indicated in your case you did. Let's talk a little bit about part-time, full-time, knowing that right now with COVID, we're seeing a lot of individuals assess their professional aspirations and balancing home, family. And I want you to just talk a little bit from your experience.
So I can tell you a little bit about my own story, and then what I hear from out in our community and from our leaders inside of Shive-Hattery as well as outside of Shive-Hattery, because I think we're missing an opportunity. But anyway, I started at Shive-Hattery in 2003. I was a part-time structural engineer. I had found a passion for engineering in our industrial sector. I really liked working with our industrial clients, and I had a blank slate in our Quad Cities office. It did not have a big industrial presence at the time, and I had a leader at the time that said, just go get it. It's all yours.
How nice.
Do what you want. Yeah. So I had the opportunity to build a good structural and engineering industrial practice while working part-time. And
I was just gonna say, like, working part-time, you got this opportunity.
And, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was insane busy with the boys and the fast deadline-paced world that is architecture and engineering. So it was not without its challenges, but what I see so many times, and this disproportionately affects women, but it affects both men and women, is that people give up, right? They give up at that very hard, difficult time in their life, whether it's when their kids are very young or where they're going through a major life change, health, and when they cannot work full time, right? And then they leave the workforce or just change careers, and it's heartbreaking to see. And it's such an opportunity for us as leaders to, if we're willing to maybe challenge our thoughts about what part-time looks like, and invest in our part-time people, right? That great things can come out of that.
Well, you're a shining example, obviously, of somebody that's gone from part-time to full-time within the same company, and sure. You were allowed opportunities to do that, and obviously you blew up Quad Cities with your sales skills, I'm sure. On that note, you obviously you had you had a trajectory from part-time to now president in a space that's dominated by men. And so can you talk to us about your personal stories or your personal experiences coming through the ranks and some of the barriers of being a woman?
So I entered the workforce in 1995. It's quite a while ago, and very different environment. However, I've been fortunate in my employer that I did not, I wasn't the recipient of harassment or feeling like my gender held me back with my employer. Out on a construction site, totally different story. Yeah. I think that still can be a problem today, but it was a huge problem in 1995, and I had to develop some really thick skin, and great mentors. And I think that's one of the things that has helped me in my career, is that I have always sought out and found great male mentors. Right.
You mentioned earlier that you said, sometimes employers juggling multiple pressures, they give up. As a woman in that space, I got to imagine on occasion some of that pressure is just being female. So were there any trigger points throughout your career that pushed you to the brink that you might have wanted to quit? And because of treatment or because of environment, culture, being in that space? Went out too many times in the construction field and got...
Well, I did my internships in the construction field and learned really quickly that is not where I wanted to spend my time. At that time, it was not a great place for women to be. And while I really appreciate the women who were trailblazers in that field, that was a very difficult environment to be in. As far as wanting to, in the consulting world, feeling like I needed to give up, that was really about everything else going on in my life. And when, the kids were young and I was working to fit in, I was working with clients that I just really wanted to give great client service to, right? It was very important to me and in this deadline world. So I would be working, trying to juggle these kids, go into the office on my days in the office, and then come home and take care of the kids. And then log back in at night and maybe work till 2 or 3 in the morning. And there were times when it was just so overwhelming that I wanted to quit. And what I was always encouraged to think about is that this is a season, right? This is a season for me, and then the season will end and change.
When we put a lot of stock in work being our identity, if we don't feel as if we're successful, then we think we've failed per se. that makes it hard if we know that we need to give our time to certain seasons. That means if it's giving time to our young children because they need us at that time more. I've had a lot of friends and associates and colleagues that made that tough decision to step back because they felt that as a woman, as a mom, they weren't being a good mom.
Right.
And I don't know if it's part of how our upbringing in terms of us being the caretakers or these gender roles that we have been ingrained in us. I think about my dad in a very patriarchal culture. It wasn't really ingrained in terms of being the caretaker. So are those gender roles that we have been ingrained that we subscribe to, I guess?
You know, I think that's part of why this issue is disproportionately affecting women. In my case, my husband was very supportive and took a very active role in raising our children, but he had a very unique work schedule. He was a firefighter. He worked 24 hours on. He worked 48 hours off, almost an impossible schedule to find daycare around. So it was just a part of making our lives work at the time, right? It's what we had in front of us, and it was just part of making our lives work. But I do feel like women probably still feel the burden of being that nurturer, caretaker, primary caregiver with kids often. I see it certainly in our industry.
Staying in that industry, you mentioned it's a season. That's how you kind of mentally coped with those challenges of juggling family and friends. I'm curious about, prior to becoming a CEO, your upbringing. You mentioned that your father was really what got you into engineering. Can you talk about any times as a youth or growing up wanting to be an engineer? Were there any moments in school or in college where somebody said something tried to derail you from that?
When did it click? And did anybody derail me?
No, they didn't. You're a CEO.
Did anybody try?
We want the other women to understand what you did.
Yes.
It clicked sometime. It was pretty late for me. Sometime in high school. Math and science were always strong for me, but I didn't know quite what I wanted to do with those until some point in high school. My dad was guest lecturing at University of Illinois, and I went with him. It happened to be the week they had their engineering open campus, and an open house where the engineering students all showed off the projects, and I was able to walk around and say, this feels good. This feels like it's what I want to do. It probably happened somewhere around freshman, sophomore year. I do remember my school counselor at the time just discouraging my choice in schools. Number one civil engineering school in the country, discouraging my choice from school, and just, are you sure that's what you want to do? That's a really hard field. A straight A student in math and science, so where was that coming from? Is that some bias?
Right. Did you ask why she said?
No.
Was it she?
It was a he.
It was a he. Okay. It was a he. Okay.
I didn't ask at the time, but didn't let it affect me, and I was very stubborn. Still am. and just carried that through.
Even though it didn't affect you, obviously it didn't. Yeah. But does it stick in the back of your mind when you think about your career and you think about other women at Shive?
Sure. Obviously, what would they do if they heard that message?
And it's a school counselor.
I'm sure it was
where
just
you're looking for guidance.
First thing out of his mouth, right? Well, why would you do that? And some part of back of his brain, he thought that was weird for me. And I think we need to be careful with those words when we're in those positions.
Right.
Absolutely.
Alliant Energy is a place where I can create the future, where my skills, creativity, and new ideas make a better tomorrow. I help deliver the energy powering moments that matter to you. It's where we care about the environment and our neighbors, a place where my talents and skills grow. My job isn't a job, it's my passion, my place, my purpose, because I am energy. See how you can put your energy to work at alliantenergy.com/careers.
Yeah, very important, I think, to be careful in our words, and especially when we're in that supervisor mentorship position, that we need to really encourage our people to build their own career path, right? Try a lot of things, try it all out, and then I can help you gravitate to, or I can help you be successful at whatever you gravitate towards.
Yeah.
That's why I think it's so important to have mentors, and not just mentors like us, but for me, my the mentors who were men were very important in my journey.
I was going to ask you that because we were talking offline, and I said, I think I want to know, as a woman in a leadership position that's in a field primarily dominated by men, where does Jen go for mentorship or support? Do you ever feel like I wish I had more female support at my level, or when you're stressed and you need to talk to somebody or be developed, what do you do?
When I'm stressed, it depends what I'm stressed about. Of course, my husband is a great sounding board, but when it's a work issue, throughout my career, I have always sought out great sounding boards and mentors, and they change throughout my career. And sometimes they're clients, sometimes they're internal, sometimes it might be somebody out in our community that I've met in the business community, and that's been great for me to get a different perspective.
That's really key, mentorship, especially when you're thinking about advancement and helping you navigate through life. That mentorship is so key. It's different than coaching. Mentorship is a dual, respectful relationship that is a benefit to both. If you can give some advice to our listeners, what to look for in a mentor? You identified a few things in terms of, depending on what the situation is, but it takes time to build mentorship in terms of relationships so that you can go to them. And you have multiple mentors at one time, Jen? Is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure. And we go to different people for different things. So for me, I looked for people who could help me navigate whatever tough issues I was dealing with at the time. So, in a client, it might be, help me navigate this political environment here. What am I not seeing? If I was meeting resistance with something, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm feeling. What do you think? Right. And just to try and get a different perspective. I think that's the key with mentorship. It allows you to get a different perspective. As long as we're just not seeking out people just like us. Right. It brings in that different perspective, and we start to challenge maybe our perceptions and the things that...
I think it's important, even as leaders, anybody in the company, we talk about what diversity looks like in a company. Sometimes it's not always something you can see physically, but the issue is, or the challenge that we give to our clients and their employees is to think differently, try to think outside the box. Go to lunch with somebody you've never met before in the workplace. You pass them every day in the hallway, maybe say hi and sit next to them in the cafeteria, things like that.
What tips can you give to listeners in terms of when you're looking at identifying a mentor? I think that's a value that I think I want to just be able to unpeel a little bit more. What do you look for in a mentor?
So one, I look for somebody who's strong in something I want to grow in. I look for somebody who can navigate something well that I am struggling in. As I grow and I stretch, that thing changes. So it might be, I can remember a time I was on, earlier in my career, I was on Plan and Zone Commission for the city of Bettendorf, and I can remember some very, very controversial things we had in front of us, and there was a Plan and Zone Commission member that was just so amazing at taking this room full of angry, upset people who were just hurling insults and just very negative energy in the room, and he was good with just a few sentences, calming the room and just restarting a very respectful and conversation so that we could hear each other. That I gravitated to that right away. How I want to learn from you. How do you do that? So I guess it just depends. Seek out people who help you fill in some of the gaps that you have. Today we've got somebody. I've got a mentor who's extremely analytical when it comes to things, and as a leader, you have to balance the analytical and the strong people skills. So when I want a different perspective, I'll often reach out to this person, and he'll maybe help me see it in a way that I don't currently see it, and then we'll.
Thank you.
can change my perspective.
Yes, so thank you for sharing those tips, because I think it's so valuable from a mentorship perspective to have that as part of your professional trajectory as well as your personal trajectory as well. Just because when you're thinking about life and work and life, not a balance. It's really, I would say, it's integrated. Some call it work-life blending, some work-life
Right.
balance, work-life integration. However you look at it, it's hard to keep it separate per se. I remember one mentor that I had, 80-year-old white man.
Yes.
I was 20, 21, 22. I literally out of college. And he was my mentor because I interned with him. And he was a founding president and CEO of the National Council for Adoption. And I learned so much from him. He gave me so many opportunities as well. And that's why I always look at mentors that are different than me. I want something different. And when you had said, I want them to help fill a gap.
Yes, it helps
really-
you grow and stretch and learn. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you're obviously a leader in a male-dominated field, and just moving into your new role as CEO. Congratulations.
Thank
as
you.
getting your new
Congratulations.
CEO position. She's a rock star. What keeps you up at night?
She's blushing over here.
Oh,
What keeps Jen up at night as you think about your position as a female CEO of such a large company with over 400 people? What keeps Jen up at night?
so this is a tough period of time to ask that. If you'd asked me that 6 months ago, it's
Diversity straight up, so we just kind of ask it.
Yeah.
Keeping it real as
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was.
That was very much focused on survival, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is going to happen as we go through this pandemic, and how is that going to affect our people? And it's survival of the company and making those decisions today. I think we're pretty much through at least the hard part, hopefully, and something else doesn't happen, the hard part of this recession, at least for the AEC industry, architecture, engineering, construction. I think we're through the pit. So prior to that and going forward, one of our largest challenges is attraction and retention of talent. It's everything in our industry. We are consultants, we're a professional service firm. And it has been an incredible challenge in the last 5 years with shortages. And diversity is also so important as we go forward. And I think those two things are related.
I was just going to ask you this, that when you're thinking about talent attraction and retention, what could your industry do to attract, talent that is diverse? Because we said that you want to be able to look at the differences, fill in the gaps. If you have a very homogenous, workforce with any industry, and even if the ACE industry, how is that going to be a benefit to markets you want to tap into?
Right.
And as consultants, we know that it's a global world now, and especially with technology, we've seen that we can really take it to the next level in terms of a growth perspective. So what do you think your industry, the ACE industry, could do more to be able to, attract diverse talent? And I know you said women is one area, and then race, ethnicity, LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, we've done a great job. We've done much better in the last 20 years attracting women to our industry, not necessarily retaining women. That's, if you look, we're doing a terrible job retaining women in our industry. People of color, we're doing a horrible job with attraction in AEC. We don't have enough people entering school. Right. I think that's a multifaceted, that starts early, that starts young, that starts with all of those guidance counselors and all of these people who are mentoring and training women. For women, most of us in my generation, as I said, had a dad who was an engineer. I've tried this many times. Women in their 30s and 40s. Ask them, what encouraged them to go in. They had a parent. Many of us had a parent who we were able to see and see ourselves in that role. I can do that job. Right. But how about if somebody's growing up in a family and in a community where they don't have that modeled at all? there's no architect or engineer they're connected to. So how do
Right.
we attract, how do we get over that hurdle? I think that's a big hurdle for our industry to get
Yeah.
over.
Oh, that's really interesting because you said you have a dad that was an engineer, so that representation was important. In my community, the Indian community, my husband's an engineer. A lot of my friends are engineers. So it's the opposite for me.
Oh,
Growing up, it's like being a doctor, engineer, lawyer was what was touted as the thing. So there's so many that go in that profession just because that's almost as if looked upon very favorably. That if you go and veer into any other liberal arts, which is me, I'm always doing something different that shouldn't. But so it was a little bit different there. It was almost like a expectation, and or if maybe not even an expectation, it's drilled into you in terms of the science, technology, engineering, math. Not saying it's a bad thing,
Right.
but that almost maps their career. And I have conversations with friends that said, well, if I could really do what my passion was, it's not what they're working at right now. That's sad to me. That is
It is
really
sad.
sad. Not to say that they don't like what they're doing, but if their passion isn't aligned,
Right.
how did they get into that career path? I'm glad for you, your career path matched your passion in terms of
Yes.
your dad
Right.
exposed you to it, which you liked, and you're passionate about it.
Well, yeah, you had your dad growing up, and the counselor who questioned you.
Oh,
Sure.
I imagine that drove you.
Yeah, there was a little bit of, I'll show you.
Do you feel it's interesting as a we often say this, and it's a fact actually in the black community, particularly with black men, that we have to work harder. I have to work twice as hard. I have
Yeah.
to work 3 times as hard because all I need to do is slip once, and I'm making it difficult for myself and the black people who follow me. Right.
Yeah.
How do you feel as a woman in those situations, and how do you, as you think about that, do you feel as if you're a trailblazer for women? Did you feel growing up in high school and in math that you had to work twice as hard? Did you ever think about those things as you moved through your career?
Not in high school, definitely through my career. I always felt a huge burden that I can't slip,
Yeah.
right? I have to be on my A game all the time because everybody's watching.
Yeah.
Everybody's watching to see if this is going to work,
Yep.
if I can do this.
Yeah.
So certainly. And then I've always felt burden for those that come behind me.
I was going to ask, do you feel that you're carrying a heavy burden sometimes? or-
Sure, sometimes. I think, whenever we're in a position where we're trying to change culture or in a position where we have an opportunity to change
Right.
culture, that is a bit of a burden, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a pressure there. I must succeed at this
Right.
for others.
Yeah. It gets hard.
You know what? When you were saying that, changing culture takes time. It's transformational. It takes time. Patience may not
Yep.
be there for individuals because they want overnight results. But I was also thinking about shattering the glass ceiling, shattering or breaking the bamboo ceiling. That for some women, because of additional intersectionalities they have, it compounds in terms of them having to shatter the glass ceiling. I say breaking the bamboo ceiling as a Indian woman, part of the Asian community, that I have leaders, that may look like Jen.
Right.
Then you have individuals that also, have other intersectionality. Jen may have them as well. I don't want to assume or presume, but sometimes others are a little bit more visible.
Yep.
And that makes it much more harder. So you're right. If you slip once, is a representative of the rest of the individuals
Right.
behind you.
Right.
And I hope that doesn't percolate, but the reality is there are biases that exist that unconsciously people may think that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I do want to kind of go back to the retention piece. You said that in this industry, attracting women, you're doing much better, but retention has been so challenging. What do you think can be of help to be able to retain them, and what could that look like in terms of even a career advancement and career mapping perspective?
Right. Well, I think the part-time thing can help a lot of women. What we see is a lot of women leave this industry, especially in architecture, when their children are young. And I don't know what it's like in other industries if we're seeing that same trend, but it is heartbreaking to me because this is such a great place for women. We're creative and we love to solve problems and build communities, and And it has been such a rewarding and meaningful career in the end, and it's just heartbreaking for me to see people give up.
Do you think most
during the hard-
most of the turnover in the industry is due to that midlife, having children, childbearing, or do you think it's I can't handle the male culture that
There may be a little bit of that as well. And every culture is different. I'm sure there are still firms
Yeah.
out there that are
Oh, yeah.
very that are still very old school.
Mm-hmm.
We'll just say that.
Yep.
Well, I think,
And that's the right way to say
Yeah.
it.
yeah, so I think whether it's for family planning that you need to take a different focus, or at least time to focus on that, or caregiving role, because if you're in a sandwich generation, you've got younger and the elder generation that you have to take care of, or if you
Yes.
just want to go and further yourself from a growth perspective and go back to school, for whatever those reasons, individuals, if they want to, go to part-time, what do you think would be good solutions to help them keep working then, so they don't just exit the industry or the workplace?
Well, for me, I can speak to my own personal experience. For me, it was having a very flexible employer. I worked really hard. I met my obligations. I met my deadlines. As I said, I knew I had to succeed in this, right? I was really a trailblazer at that time. I was the only part-time woman in my position.
Oh, wow. So the
I
only
really
one.
was trailblazing, and I felt a huge responsibility to do that well. So it was a lot of hard work, but it allowed me to meet the needs that I had that day, or at that time in my life, in my personal life, and still not put my career on hold, totally on hold. And we see so many people do that.
Do you think those experiences, or maybe the question is, how have you used that experience to help other women that
Sure.
have, I imagine you're mentoring other women.
Sure.
Have you used your experiences to help them? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So that's not the case anymore. We have all kinds
Yeah.
of men and women working part-time while they're working, while they're in those, for me, it was the difficult years of the really young children, and it seems to be common.
Right.
So there's some mentorship there, right? I have a lot of our people reach out to me, and how do I do this? How do I navigate this?
Right.
I've got this deadline, and I've got these. Tell me how you did this,
Right.
and so there's that opportunity there. I think once you have a couple people that go through it, and you can see that it really, really works, the momentum starts building.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So you mentioned flexibility. Having the flexibility was of benefit. What else did your employer do at that time? And that was probably Shive, because that's who.
Yes, it
Started
was
part-time.
Shive-Hattery.
So you were the first part-time talent for Shive-Hattery.
Yeah, first, and even then, as I moved through those early years, I had the opportunity to become a group leader, which was my first real leadership position in Shive-Hattery. I was still part-time, leading full-time people. So again, they did not consider me for that position
Right.
because I was part-time. It was about does she have the ability to do this and do this job well, and not well, we won't consider her until she's full-time. When you're full-time, you can do this, and when you're full-time, you can do
Right.
this. So
I think that's great. I know we've had experiences with organizations where individuals have flat out just said reasons why they don't see a lot of women in leadership, and they instantly turn to it's child rearing, and time. So it's very. I commend Shive for not thinking that way and thinking outside the box, because here you are, and now you've trailblazed and created that path for so many other women in your career. Do you have women at Shive who seek advice about being a woman in this space?
yeah, all the time. We've got great career coaching programs, and there's just a lot of avenues to reach out, and I think that's really important. I think that's really important to help develop this culture, is to make sure we've got really open network and a really open culture, so that people are comfortable seeking out advice and a mentor in our
Absolutely.
culture.
Well, I really enjoyed
Yeah.
having this kind of conversation about diversity in your talent composition, and part-time, full-time, something that we hear quite a bit. And so it's really nice to kind of really delve into it. And I know that from what research and data is showing from COVID, we're going to see more and more and more of this.
Yes.
What advice can you give to individuals that are contemplating that, whatever gender they may be? What advice would you give them, Jen?
Hang in there and ask, start a conversation with your employer before you decide to leave. I'm very concerned. We've made all this progress, at least as far as more women in our industry. I'm really concerned in our industry that COVID, right? A lot of people went part-time during COVID to manage school and kids, and they're just struggling to manage life right now. And we've had a couple people say, I can't do this. I can't do my job and school, right? And they're managing school, and I need to take a leave of absence. We've had a couple people do that, and I think our industry is seeing that across the board. I'm really, really concerned that those people who left during COVID are not going to come back, and we need them to come back. We really need them to come back. So start, if you're in that position, start your conversation with your employer, map out a plan on how you can make this work, and really start some open conversation. If you're an employer, maybe challenge the traditional, we call it butt and seat, right?
Yeah.
Challenge that.
Very
right?
true.
Just because somebody's sitting in their seat and you can see them isn't necessarily how you should be adding or measuring the value to the
I
organization.
think that's a great point.
Yes.
And it requires more work, right? It requires, you have to really start looking at value and how is this person adding value to my organization? And that takes a lot of conversation. It takes coaching and a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it's what we should be doing anyway.
It does. I would say, it's positions as leaders, the old saying, water flows to the least resistance, and we see a lot of leaders taking the least resistance instead of putting some sugar and making a drink that's flavorful and better, for lack of a better term.
I like your analogy there.
I'm so good at it. I love it.
But, we were talking about butts in the seat.
Yeah.
Working from home.
Yeah.
I know that there's different school of thoughts in terms of, is there going to be more of that? Are companies, organizations going to start looking at that a little bit more? If they do, it kind of opens up the opportunity from a talent attraction, retention perspective to be able to attract more diverse talent so that they don't have to necessarily be in your own backyard to be able to work as well.
Right.
But I think about the whole butts in the seat conversation. You said that working from home is the same concept in the sense that they may not physically see them.
Right.
So we are going to have a different shift when it comes to how are we looking at measuring value in the workplace.
Right.
And maybe that's because of the old traditional manufacturing days where people are able to clock in, clock out, and you see them.
Yes.
And is that really measuring productivity though, Jen?
It is not. It is absolutely not.
No. It is, and that's the challenge, and not to challenge the manufacturing industry, but that's the point. We're talking about human behavior, and not widgets.
Yes.
And that's a different conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So we could go on all day. This has been a great conversation, and we really appreciate you coming. And we've got a couple more segments, but before we move to the next segment, I wonder what our listeners are thinking right now. So we have a question here, and we this is a great exercise we like to do. We like to take listener questions and then we add input, but they want to hear from our guests. So this is James in Silvis, Illinois, and James says, I had a communications department in my company, and I'm getting a lot of pressure from leadership about the use of social media and personal accounts by employees who have social positions, various positions. As a leader, what advice do you have to help me navigate this issue?
I think if I happened upon or learned about inappropriate social media content of somebody that was clearly one of our employees, I think I'd have to sit down and just start with a conversation. And it's hard for us when we as an employee are working and part of an organization, we reflect our company values, right? So that's difficult when you see somebody maybe spewing something on social media that is is contrary to the company values and our people values,
Yeah.
so then I'd have to sit down and have a conversation
Yeah.
with that person. Why?
Yeah. We're
Why
big
would you
believers
do
in that,
this?
and I think that's important.
And start there. And really, if somebody is, it would have to be a coaching.
Yeah.
It's all about coaching. And if we've really got somebody that does not reflect our values, that's going to affect how they work with our clients and how how all of that.
It's a lot of factors, but I think the one thing I appreciated what I heard you say, and the listeners too would. Hope you like that answer, James.
Sorry, it's not an easy one.
But communication, I think, starting with a conversation to at least understand that person's point of view, that employee's point of view, before you before you provide guidance, because it's easy to just pull out a manual and say Section 8B says that you're not supposed to do that. You're fired, instead of saying Section 8B says you're not supposed to do that, but I have the authority to have a conversation with you to make a decision.
And what do other people, what does your client that's reading that think? Right? Have you thought through all of this?
It's a tough balance.
Well, thank you, James. And listeners, continue to please submit your questions, comments, and suggestions to us, as we love to hear from you. And as you can see, we have we get good advice out, or at least insights and reflections. So please keep them coming.
Yes, please.
And I think now we're at another piece of the show here. I know Jen has already seen this, listeners, as I had the opportunity to go and do a workplace leadership workshop with her and her dynamic colleagues. So she's already tuned to this, but hopefully you don't get the same question.
So do you remember you threw the ball to me and I could not catch it?
Have you been practicing?
Not an athlete.
Well, you're not the first one, and you won't be the last one. And Anthony knows that I'm horrible at this. And he's just grateful that it's a soft ball. It's called a diversity thumb ball. It's a great icebreaker, right? What did you think when we did this?
It was great.
Yeah?
I had great conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
Started some great conversation.
Okay, good. So what it is, it has prompts and questions on it. What we do, we just throw it to someone. They have to read it, and then they have to authentically just, respond to it.
Yeah.
Even if the answer is, I don't know. That's okay. All right, so we'll just start here. I'm going to make it easy for you.
Thank you. Why do you think people tend to seek friends who are similar to them? I think that's about comfort. I think it's, and same with, I think it's the same reason we tend to hire people who are like us. It's easy to have that conversation. There's an instant connection. There's some understanding. And you just feel that immediate connection down in your gut. And that's a scary thing for us. One, because we don't grow. If we surround ourselves with people who are like us, we don't grow. And it's really harmful in business. So I've really had to challenge myself in interviews, because I notice it in interviews when we're interviewing people, and sometimes I'll feel an instant connection, right? And I'll think, is that because they're a lot like me, or is that for some other reason? And
I'll be honest.
Or like Champagne alum, ULI. Oh,
yes.
So that connection.
There
it
you
happens,
go.
though. We do that even on a resume.
It is.
So it's human nature.
But yes, it is human nature. But I always said that if I find something that I connect with somebody on this resume, by golly, I'm going to go through the rest of them and find something that I like to create that equitable playing field. That's how I've been able to have to do this as a way to check my biases. But it's so true. But I hope you connect with me even beyond just you.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, whose turn? You can throw the ball this time.
All
it's
right.
your turn. You
To me or Anthony.
I'll go for Anthony.
A time you shared an unpopular idea.
That never happens to you, does it?
Ever?
Never. Gosh, that's a good one. I'm trying to think of COVID's had me in the house. I haven't had to share ideas with too many people lately.
You're on the virtual scene.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with my outside of workspace. I've shared some unpopular ideas in the music studio before. I'm a huge hip hop fan. I like to produce music, and I've come up with some some pretty stupid ideas about sounds and tried to fight through them. But the interesting thing is when you're working with a group of dynamic musicians, you have a lot of ideas in the room, hence the diversity. So while it was unpopular to me, it was unpopular to the friends I was in the studio with. We ended up using some of those sounds.
Well, there you go.
So
see?
That's
it
the
was
beauty.
about blending and come around the circle. So I've seen that a lot. So, all right, you ready?
It's always got to be.
That was a tough one for me. I'm usually pretty quick on my feet.
Describe an instance when someone went out of their way to make you feel included.
You know, as much as we throw these balls, we should know better, shouldn't we?
I don't sit around
I know.
reading these and
I
coming up
know.
with questions ahead of
I
time
keep-
just to look good
Exactly.
on the podcast. Well, actually today, Jen, at an event that we were both at, that you were a panelist, you came to me and made me feel included right away.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that.
And I'm not brown nosing either, people.
Oh, you better stop.
But
We're
it was
not-
the truth. I
God.
was in there, and Jen just came right away and made me feel included. I like that. It made me feel good, and
Yeah.
so thank you, Jen.
You're welcome.
Thank you
It's
for
great
making
to
my
see
buddy feel good.
you. Yeah.
I have to work on that, don't I?
Well, we are about wrapping up our segment here today. We want to just ask you, is there anything that you want to share with our listeners, something that you had thought of wanting to share but we haven't got to?
Well, gosh, no, I think, but I'm really excited about, this is, I think, going to be a big year of change for us. And I'm just really excited about the future right now. I think last year was a tough year
Yeah.
for so many reasons.
Yeah.
And just looking forward to moving on, and we're certainly seeing things change in the business world and things starting to pick up. And I hope we take the things that we learned through this really rough year we just went through and use it to make us all better.
Do you hear that? You're making change, taking what you learned to make change in 2021. We appreciate those tips.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, any final advice you would give to our listeners
Oh gosh.
in terms of helping them
Other than
on
that.
their equity, diversity, inclusion, and engagement journey?
Be open, seek out people who are not like you, seek out mentors who are not like you, and just start open communication. Start talking to people.
Well, you heard it from one of our very own trailblazers. This was a great episode. We're so happy that you're able to take the time to be able to be here today. It's our first podcast, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, as we say on Diversity Straight Up,
Keeping it real. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having
thank
me.
you. Thank you to our listeners, as we wouldn't be here without your support. Help us grow our subscriber base by sharing our show with others.
Love this new episode of Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union? Then head over to the most popular podcast audio platforms to describe, rate, and review us. And check out our other episodes while you're there.
Catch us on our next episode, which drops monthly.
We'd love to hear from you. Hit us up and send your questions, comments, and suggestions to info@diversitystraightup.com.
Remember, wherever you live, work, and play, our backyards are increasingly global. It's not enough to simply be a leader. Be a global leader by leveraging diversity with equity, inclusion, and engagement. And share your journey. This may empower others to be bold change agents. Be courageous, be authentic, be vulnerable.
Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union.
Keeping it real.
You've been listening to Diversity Straight Up, brought to you by Green State Credit Union. Additional support provided by Alliant Energy and the City of Cedar Rapids. For more from the Corridor Business Journal, please visit corridorbusiness.com. This episode was produced by Joe Coffey of Coffee Grande Studios.